Welcome to World Food Day and our joint call to action on food habits. Why listen into this? Because your food choices matter so much more than we think. We have experts here today who will guide us on why and what to do to change our food diets. So let's meet our experts. Here they are. Elaine, please.
Hi, I'm Erlene Cruz. I'm the director of Kitchen Connection, which is a project co-implemented by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the UN Department of Global Communications Youth Representative Steering Committee. Thank you for having me.
And greetings to everybody. I'm Chef Chris Ketke, and I'm here on behalf of World Chefs, where I am the chairman of the Feed the Planet Committee, which is all about teaching chefs about sustainable actions and how to cook sustainably.
You're on mute, Brent.
There we go. Hey everybody, my name is Brent Loken. I am the food lean scientist. I work, and one of the things that I think is so great about food here, and it's great to be teaming up, on this with you, Ingrid, is to talk about food again. I mean, the power is on our plates here, and it's great to be able to share that with all of you. So,
thank you. Yeah, and I'm Ingrid Melstig, represent the Electrolux Food Foundation with a mission of inspiring and educating on sustainable cooking and eating around the world. So first I will ask the questions. Then you are welcome to ask questions to these experts. Simply use the button on your right side of the screen, and you can also chat there. So, but let's focus our topics today on three things. There are three to-dos, and we jump right into the first one, which is about eating more plants. We know we're supposed to, but Brent, why is a plant-based diet so important?
Yeah, well, we hear a lot about these critical issues every single day. We hear about the environmental crisis and we hear about the biodiversity crisis, and we tend to think, oh, well, that's about planes, it's about driving, it's about all these other things that, but food, really? And now what we're starting to realize is that all of these environmental problems that we're facing, so many of them link back directly to the food that we eat. It's the food choices that we make every single day, what we eat on our plate, impacts the environment, impacts how many species are lost, and we will not be able to achieve all these environmental goals and health goals if we don't start eating more plants. So food is absolutely at the front and center of all these important critical choices that we make. Here's some facts right here. When you're talking about the health impacts too, food is currently the leading cause of death globally. And we've got these dual things happening at the same time where people have too much food and it's leading to overweight issues, and people don't have enough food. And I think it's pretty crazy in this day and age that we have both of those happening at the same time. It's something we have to fix.
Thanks. So we know we're supposed to include more plants into our diet, but then how? Chris, can chefs lead the way?
Absolutely, the chefs can lead the way. At World Chefs, we like to say that chefs have the power of the white jacket. And what that basically means is that we as chefs, we have influence. We are, in many respects, rock stars. I mean, people look up to chefs in many societies around the world. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility. So for instance, just one little statistic. In the US, in the last 5 years, 51% of restaurants have added vegetarian dishes to the menu. And that's not just in the US. I see that as a global trend. And what's really more interesting about this fact isn't that there's just vegetarian, menu choices, but they're increasingly interesting ones. And so chefs are taking the time to come up with interesting menu options that are vegetarian to help, sort of inspire people to eat more plants. Now, the other side of that equation is that while chefs have a lot of power to sort of shape consumer opinion, consumers have a lot of power to shape what the restaurants are doing. So this is a great little statistic of ×3. What does that mean? What that means is we know, for instance, when something comes from sort of top down, it's somewhat effective. When it comes from bottom up, it's 3 times more effective. And, you have to remember, chefs are in the business of running a restaurant, of running a business, of trying to make a profit. And a lot of times, they may be somewhat reticent to change because they've got a formula that's working. But you, the consumer, have amazing power to be able to sort of inspire and push the chefs to offer more plant-based food. When you go into the restaurant and say, I really wish you had this or that, you have power, and never underestimate that, because we listen to you.
Thank you, Chris. Very inspiring. So let's move on to the next topic about try new things. Think about it. How diverse do you eat at home or even in the restaurant? Most of us, we turn the same dishes around using perhaps 30 fruits and vegetables when there are 30,000 edible options out there. Erlene, you also teach on sustainable diets at New York University. How can we start trying new things? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I think this topic is critical. It's crucial because we rely on 4 core crops for 80% of our meals. And, when we eat more diverse foods, we're not only eating better for ourselves, but also for the planet. And so when I think of this question, it's something, that is not based in facts or figures for me. It's something inherent in human nature. When we were foragers, when we were hunter-gatherers, we were not relying on a set menu. We weren't planning what our next meal was. We were very much relying on the earth and what it offered, and relying on that for our creativity. And so it's an inherent human need to be creative, to push the boundaries, and we have to go back to that. So we can get inspiration from, young people. We can get inspiration from indigenous people and our great-grandmothers, the way they used to eat prior to the Industrial Revolution, and, how that has sped up the food system to our detriment. Also, cookbooks are great. On that occasion, I can mention that we're working on a book for the United Nations that is set to launch at the UN Food Systems Summit next year. And people might wonder, why is the UN even interested in a cookbook? Because they tend to the UN as a, peace and security organization. But we know that, peace and food security are inextricably linked. And that is, reflected in the World Food Program, which is part of the UN, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. So obviously there are links there. And, cooking classes can be great. We actually offer online interactive cooking classes that are all globally focused. We have over 150 countries represented through home cooks, indigenous people, farmers, and professional chefs like this team. So yes, chefs can definitely lead the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Speaking of chefs, Chris, what's your advice on trying new things?
Well, the first thing is, kind of going back to what I said earlier, the consumer has amazing power. And so the first thing is you have to ask for it. You have to go into your stores and say, what you're offering to me is not acceptable. I want this, or I want that, or I want you to offer me other things, because it's all about sending market signals. The consumer can send market signals to the restaurant in terms of what they should be doing or what the consumer desires that they do. The consumer can also send those same signals to the market. And if that doesn't happen, things aren't going to change. So you have power. Ask for it. Secondly, is when you go to the store, look at what is kind of ripe and ugly. Why? Because those are two things that people who are selling things like produce, they really don't traditionally want to deal with it, because ripe means, maybe I'm not going to be able to sell it. Maybe it's going to then go into the trash because nobody perceives that it's good because it's this close to being overripe. But what we know is at that moment, it actually tastes the best. And of course, ugly, vegetables, ugly fruit, a lot has been written about that and how people are shopping with their eyes and looking for the perfect sort of visual fruit and vegetable. That doesn't necessarily mean it tastes any better. So buy ripe, buy ugly. And then the last one is, I always tell people, try to support local. When you go to the store, ask them, what are you buying that's local? And if they're not buying much, that's your moment to say, again, you have power to say, look, I want to support local economies. I want to support local farms. And so I need to see more local produce, local, fruits, vegetables. The other thing there, and last thing is, in terms of local, when we talk about, unusual stuff, what we're referring to is biodiversity. So it's great to support local, but it also is, it's even better to support local that's pushing the, biodiversity thing. So I want to see local farmers producing fruits and vegetables that are not the norm. And if we can do that and support that as consumers and as chefs, that's how we really sort of move things forward. So try the unusual, try the ugly, try the super ripe, and you'll be doing great things.
Super tips, thank you. Brent, one question to you then. Does it really matter what I choose, what food I choose?
You mean on an individual basis? I mean, it absolutely matters. I used to work in Indonesia. I used to work on, how do we protect these gorgeous rainforests, and how do we save things like orangutans and clouded leopards? And when I give talks about that subject, one of the things that people kept on asking me was, what can I do? Sitting in Canada or sitting in Europe, what can I do to make the world a better place and to save all these creatures over there? And it was hard sometimes, because it's sometimes hard sitting in one part of the world to know that you're impacting another part of the world. But this is a great thing about food, is that the choice that you make every single day, and I keep on saying the power is on your plate, has a direct impact on water which is used somewhere else. It has a direct impact on whether we lose species in a rainforest in Brazil, or how much greenhouse gas emissions is actually emitted. It absolutely has a huge impact, and we like to think about transport and all these other things, but really most of the impact of your life comes from the direct food that you eat. So if you choose to eat more plant-based foods, if you choose to, and we're not saying don't eat meat, and we're not anti-meat. What we're saying is that let's not make meat the center place of your meal. Let's put it off to the side. And when we start to make those choices, it has an absolutely massive impact on the planet, probably the single greatest impact that we can have, and we feel great. I mean, your health improves. So it's a real win-win. And one of the myths also is that eating this way is not good. I mean, if you eat plant-based foods, it doesn't taste good. It's boring. It's not creative, and that's an absolute fallacy that we have to start dispelling as well too. Because eating this way, we can make plant-based foods absolutely delicious and beautiful and tasty. These are choices that we can make 3 times every single day, and each one of us that's listening to this should do it.
Yeah, the power is in our plates. Okay, time for the third topic, which is wasteless. I want you just to reflect a few seconds here on this number. Did you know that 1/3 of all food produced in the world goes to waste? So question to all of you, what can we do to reduce food waste? Erlene, would you like to start?
Sure. This topic means a lot to me. Food waste, we're a country, it would be the 3rd largest in the world for context, and it's a challenge we can tackle in our own kitchens. I think of myself, my family and I went apple pick past weekend, and I have a plethora of apples now. My household is pretty small, and so I turned to recipes to help me, develop, meals or desserts that can, use up the apples. And I think that same approach can apply when we have, one ingredient or 2 that are about to go bad. Instead of buying more foods, we can turn to recipes that can inspire us. There are very simple recipes with only 3 ingredients or so online that can create elaborate meals. You know, if we use spices creatively, it can make it, you know, taste incredibly good. Young people really have a lot of power as well. We can turn to kids to inspire us with their creativity, and that will in turn inspire their peers and their parents.
Thank you. You're breaking up a bit, but let's hope we have a better sound from Chris.
I hope so. So, you know,
Yes,
food waste is, you know, every time I hear that 1/3 statistic, it always just makes me sort of stop for a minute and say, how is that possible? And I know the reasons why, but it's just unacceptable. And I think that, you know, in terms of what we can do, and I like what Brent said, you know, each of us we have this power to change. And, you know, it's the choices we make. So for instance, in restaurants, we see food waste as basically reducing our profit. Because anything that I purchase that I can't sell, well, that's a loss of money, and that hurts my bottom line. But for somebody at home, it's really the same thing. If you go to the store and you buy things and then you put it in the trash, that is just a waste of your money. It's a waste of everything that didn't accomplish anything. And so I think it's really to sort of change our mindset. And instead of saying it's trash, to sort of look at it and say, no, it's a resource, and maybe it's a challenge. Like, how can I take those things that maybe aren't perfectly perfect and turn them into something great? And I'll tell you, it's really quickly a story. You know, when I was very, you know, in my young, you know, days as learning to be a chef, and I was living in France, I was in the southwest of France staying with some friends, and I met an older gentleman, and we were out for a walk one day, and he says to me, I don't understand this younger generation. And then he proceeded to tell me the story of, you know, living through World War II. And what he said was what struck me. He says, I don't understand this generation. They throw away bread. And now bread is an inexpensive product, and, you know, it gets a little stale and people would throw it out. His point was a good one. And that is that everything that we have, we can do something with. And if you think about, you know, stale bread in the sort of culinary lexicon of dishes, there's so many things that you can do with stale bread and turn it into really delicious dishes. So I guess my challenge would be to everybody listening here, before it goes out, ask yourself, what could I potentially do with that? And go online and look at cookbooks and figure out a way that doesn't get wasted, because it really is a travesty.
Thank you so much. Brent, would you like to add something on food waste?
Yeah, and you know, this is a really great conversation, and you know, we keep on coming back to the power of the individual and the power of the consumer to make these choices, and that goes with food loss and waste too. I mean, we have to start figuring out how to actually plan better, plan our meals better, you know. But also at the same time, we're all busy. We come home, we've got kids. We've had a long day of work, and we're trying to figure out what to make, and we go to the shopping. You know, we buy food that we might use, might not use, and some of it ends up in the trash because we don't have time to plan. You know, so we're going to have to figure out how to solve that problem also. And I don't want to, like, you know, although that the power is in the hands of the consumer, I don't want to let off the hook the power of the politicians and the policymakers. You know, the politicians and the policymakers have to put regulations in place that make it expensive to waste food, that make it expensive to buy junk food and sell junk food. We need businesses to get on board that will help us plan better and make all this easier for us. I just don't want to pass everything over onto the consumer and say it's all up to you to solve this problem, because we need help from the people making those decisions. And once we get the top down and bottom up coming together, that's where the magic happens, and that's where we'll see real change.
Yeah, and another aspect on food waste is that people eat too little, but also just as many people eat too much, right?
Yeah, and when we're looking at overweight and obesity, you know, I tend to think of overweight and obesity. If you're eating more food than what you need, it's actually a form of food waste. If you only need 2,500 kilocalories per day, then if you eat 3,000, you could almost consider that 500 calories per day of food waste. So we really need to only start eating within the limits of what we actually need and not any more than that.
Okay, thanks. It's time to bring in the questions from the viewers. So if you haven't already typed in, then take the chance to do that now. We will focus the questions on these three topics that we just discussed, namely eat more plants, try new things, and waste less. So I will hand over to my colleague Virginia Melion, who will read the questions. So over to you, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, Brent, Chris, and Arlene for this inspiring conversation. We have actually lots of questions here, so let's take one of them. So what's in the single most powerful change we can make as consumers of food for a positive impact on the planet?
Who would like to go first on this one?
Yeah, I can jump in there. It's consuming less red meat and dairy. So what we're seeing is that reduced consumption of animal source foods has a huge impact on most environmental areas. So I would say if there's one choice that you could make, it would be to eat less animal source foods and eat more plants.
Great, thank you. Another one here. How could we, as consumers, influence the biggest stores who waste the most food based on the fact that it's more expensive for them to keep the unattractive, close to expiration date food on shelves than to discard them?
Who would like to go first this time?
I can try.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, apologies. I wasn't sure. I think, there's a lot of power in our hands, in our phones. Social media has exposed a lot of faults in our food system. And we as consumers have so much power to expose that, and not in a negative way, but we can call each other out and draw attention to the specific stores or specific industries that are, perhaps not doing their part to contribute. But perhaps that conversation can start internally with the chief sustainability officer of the respective companies. I think that, a lot of times they do want inspiration and they do want it to come from their, consumers. And so I think starting internally, if that doesn't work, then certainly, bring it out into the public and make sure that it's known.
I'm just going to add one thing to that really quickly, which is, social media is so very powerful. But also, I think it's the opposite is true. In other words, if there are stores that are doing it the right way, we need to call them out on social media and celebrate them, because their competition is looking at that. And if they see that somebody is getting much more attention because of something positive that they're doing, that sort of gives a nudge to the other people to sort of start doing it also.
Good point.
Yeah, and on that, I guarantee that when it's so expensive to throw away that food, stores will stop doing it. That money talks. So if we could figure out how to put in the regulations in place to make it so expensive so that stores stop throwing this food away, I think we'll see change very fast.
Right. Okay, let's move to the next question. What does the panel think about lab-grown replacement meat?
Brent, do you want to start?
I think it's a great transition food. It's a great way to transition away from animal source foods. One of the things we have to consider with all lab grown meats or any sort of artificial meats is that it's healthy at the same time. So we might, if it's not healthy, we might be solving the environmental issues but creating health issues. And I know that there's certain cases of some artificial meats being good for the environment, but not necessarily any better for your health. And that's why we have to hold both of those at the same time and consider both health and the environment. But it's a good step. I just don't think we're there yet. We have more work to do.
Right.
And I would also say, and in the meantime, let's cook lots of vegetables and fruits, because the lab grown meat is still quite a ways off. And the reality is we have the solution at our fingertips, and that is to create delicious food, plant-based food, delicious plant-based food. That's really the big solution right now.
Okay. I don't know if I get this question, but what could you specify the source behind the claim that bottom-up initiatives are 3 times more effective?
Yes, it's from WWF. So maybe you can explain it better, Brent. It's from your report this week.
From a report this week. Yeah, so what we talk about in this report that we just launched this week is the need for both bottom-up and top-down initiatives. The more bottom-up initiatives are the soft policy interventions, and they're more like education campaigns, inform the consumer, really focusing on the bottom-up change. Whereas the top-down are the harder ones, and that's implementing policy and putting policy and regulation in place. And what we are saying is that both are needed. You need both the bottom up to happen, you need both the top down to happen, and you can't just rely on one or the other.
All right, okay. Very shortly then, could you, Aline, tell us a little bit more about the UN Cookbook?
Sure. We have some, great chefs lined up. Manal Alalem, Massimo Bottura, Daniel Balud, Grace Ramirez. We have all of the components of the food system, the special players in the food system who we want to involve, including the chefs, but also farmers and indigenous peoples, and you. So I'm happy that this question came up because right now we are launching a public recipe challenge. If you go on our social media and Connection, you can find out a little bit more as to how you might enter a recipe. And the key is that the recipe is sustainable, good both for people and planet, which is very much in line with this conversation and a lot of the points that Brett referred to. Thank you for that.
Okay, I take the last question here before time runs out. Hello, in your opinion, what is the best way, the most positive way to encourage your family and friends to move towards more plant-based diets and adopt more environmentally friendly habits without seeming too pushy?
Brent, you're in Europe. What would you reply?
I was actually doing a podcast earlier and we were talking about meat shaming because there's a whole flight shaming movement here. And I was asked a question whether they think meat shaming is the way to go. I don't think we should meat shame. I don't think we should diet shame anybody. I think the power is by example. You set the example, you provide it. It's probably the best way to do it. However, make really, really tasty vegetarian or plant-based foods, and it doesn't matter, people will eat it. There are so many examples of people eating something and they think it's meat, but it's not meat. And if we can get to that point where we can cook plant-based foods that way, then people are not going to really care what they eat.
And I'm just going to say a really fast follow-up to that, because I was going to say the same thing, which is the reality is it's all in the taste, right? If we make wonderful food, that's how we do it, because people will always go where things taste delicious. And the possibilities in the vegetable world are so amazing. So take the time to really make your vegetables taste great and interesting.
Nice. We've run out of time for questions, but your questions really have inspired us to come back to you with new lives events. So now back to you, Ingrid. Thank you all for your questions. We will take care of them in our next live meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's time to conclude. And we can conclude with that food is change. The choices we make do matter to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. So we want, all of us would like you to take action and contribute to a better tomorrow by adopting these 3 things. Do try new things, do eat more plants, and try to waste less. So with this, we would like to say bye-bye from all of us, all 4 organizations, and wish you a good weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.